Some leaders leave footprints, others leave libraries. You're tuning into the Authors on Mission podcast, where industry giants become literacy legends. In every episode, we talk with authors who turn their brilliance into books that transform lives. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authors on Mission. Welcome to your authorship experience. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another exciting episode of Authors on Mission podcast, the podcast dedicated to bringing you insights and strategies from established experts who've achieved success while inspiring authors along the way. I'm your host, Danielle Hutchinson, Chief Creative Officer at Authors on Mission, and today I am absolutely thrilled to be joined by Michael Wendroff, whose thriller, What Goes Around, has been making waves since its publication in Bloomsbury. Michael's journey to becoming a published author is fascinating as his book. Growing up surrounded by the publishing industry, he's always dreamed of writing a novel. However, it's been a successful marketing career, and it took that good old global pandemic to push him to fulfill his ambition. What Goes Around is a pulse-pounding thriller featuring detectives navigating many different conflicts, and the novel has already earned praise from best-selling authors and just has so much unexpected twists and amazing things to discuss. So today, Michael is going to share his thoughts about transitioning from marketing expert to novelist, the craft of thriller writing, and valuable advice for aspiring authors everywhere. Without further ado, Michael, welcome to our podcast.
Hi there. Thanks so much. Happy to be here.
Awesome. I'm very excited because usually on this podcast, we have a lot of nonfiction authors, and we've had a couple people writing fiction and thrillers or mystery, but this is the first one I've had in a while. I'm very excited to learn more about, what it's like to dive into that sort of writing space and more about your book. So it's going to be a really insightful episode.
Great.
Awesome. Well, if you don't mind just starting off telling us a little bit more about yourself. I gave a little bit of a rundown before, but I'm sure there's much more to it. Basically, what led you to write this book?
Well, what led me to write this book was actually something that my mother said to me the second I was born, or I'm told. I was put on her chest. She looked deeply into my eyes, and she said, "Oh, how nice to see you again." And it was that again part that always intrigued me. I wanted to do something with it because, she was greeting me at birth as if she knew me, as opposed to a newborn. And, I guess it's been in the back of my mind, my entire life. And I guess the way my perspective is that perhaps there are these unbreakable bonds that could transcend time. And, like sometimes you'll meet someone and you take a instant liking to them, or you meet someone and you don't quite like them. Well, maybe there's a reason for that. Maybe there's something behind that from way back again. And the other thing about that line of hers was really that it's nice to think that, perhaps we will see our loved ones again, if not, maybe in heaven, or maybe, back in life again. Who knows? Do I believe that? I'm not sure. My mother certainly did, but I keep an open mind. I mean, it would be nice. And clearly the other way that it's impacted the perspective of my life is really that I believe you better be nice to people, because what goes around comes around.
Yeah, absolutely. And you never know who you're going to run into later down the line in life or anything. But, I think the main point of your story there is to kind of embrace changes as they might come. And I'm liking that it really seems to have inspired you on your writing journey. What exactly about that phrase kind of developed these plot seeds in your head? Like how exactly did you draw that into the book?
Well, I always wanted to write a thriller because I do come from a bit of a background around books, but I wanted, when I finally wrote my thriller, I wanted it to be a little bit different. So I'd always thought about that, but then didn't quite know how to put that into a novel. So I wrote something that brings some contemporary events in from today's world. And then finally, really, it's in I do have a lot of twists and turns, and I have a lot of hints about how I use that in the finale. but it really is in, what's been called a very original ending. It really is a twist that is surprising and goes back to that first line that my mother told me. And I guess if you like the movie The Sixth Sense, you'll like this book.
Okay, that's a good comparison then for everybody to, check out. I was looking at it, a little bit as well, and I really do like the way that you've presented this. Just like your example just then, there's a lot of dark themes, including white supremacy, drug trafficking, violence. There's a lot of work that goes into writing about these kinds of topics in order to do them justice, but then also convey the plot of your book too. Based on that, I guess my question is, what research went into portraying these elements so authentically and so well?
Thank you. Well, I did do a lot of research. And, for me, when I wrote this, it was when ChatGPT was just in its infancy. So I was Googling and getting the 50 articles coming up on Google. I mean, these days with ChatGPT for research, you have to be careful, but still, it's much more efficient. So, people writing today, it's a little bit easier in terms of getting in depth into subjects. But I would say that for me, the most important thing in research is to actually talk to the people who are involved in the professions you're writing about. So, for example, I spoke to FBI agents. I spoke to a chief of police. I spoke to a female detective who's right here in our town, which was key because one of my characters, Jill, is a female detective. So I got a lot of insights in what it's like to be a woman working in that situation, and a lot of anecdotes, which I was able to include in my story. So, working with the real people in your book is very important. Now, I don't think I spoke to any serial killers, but who knows?
That's honestly really interesting because, well, you first started off by saying, "Oh, I was using ChatGPT research," and I was like, great. A lot of people are these days. Okay, but then you kind of took that a step farther, and I'm honestly very surprised and intrigued to know you actually went out and you spoke to these people who have similar professions. That's like doing all the extra credit for your class or something. I love it.
A
um,
plus.
yeah. What was that like? I mean, what, you just like called up an FBI agent and was like, "Hey, can we chat?" And they were like, "Yeah." Like, do they do that for
Well,
everybody? What, tell me
and
more about that.
it's interesting because, I live in a community, so, I happen to know an FBI agent that lives two doors down, and I played tennis with the police chief, who's retired but used to be a chief. And then in terms of speaking to the female detective at our local police department, yeah, I did. I did just start off by writing in, and I got a good response, and then they put me in touch with the woman, and I met the detective at the police station, and it was great because and of course I put her in my acknowledgments. And when the book came out, she was so excited. And she said, "Oh, I told all my friends and relatives, they all bought it. They were all so excited." And she's hoping to help me with the second book too. So it was a fun experience.
That's really cool. I mean, I guess at the end of the day, what you have to know from that then to everybody listening is it's about those connections then. Like you just, you sort of had a lot of pre-existing relationships that helped you get this kind of research. So, never burn a bridge. You never know who you're going to need to speak to or draw knowledge from. That's really incredible. I'm very interested by this. So what was like the interview process like for them? Did you come with a set of questions that you knew you needed to get from a certain person, or was it more discussion based?
No, I definitely had a set of questions. I mean, I did not record anything because I wanted them to be really at ease. So I was quickly jotting down my notes. But, I had things I wanted to know based on both, what's the correct procedures that you would go through in these situations, as well as relating to my story and the characters and their development. And would someone in that position really act like that? So it was a combination of those things.
Understood, understood. Well, again, thank you for sharing that with us. I think that's a very unique thing to think about because a lot of writers that I speak to, nonfiction writers primarily, they might have testimonials or case studies in their books, but taking a real person's perspective and turning that into a character in your book or a plot point. Really cool stuff. I like that a lot. Something for everyone to learn from and implement themselves as well. So going back to more of, I guess, your book and the content of it itself, you told me that, well, actually, reviewers have said this, that there is a huge revelatory twist in your book. So without giving away your spoilers, I'm wondering, how do you develop twists like that in your book? I mean, for a thriller, it's a given. You have to have those twists and those shocking moments. What kind of advice can you give to aspiring authors who might be looking for some tips in that regard?
Well, for me, that twist actually went back to what we talked about earlier, which is what my mother said to me when I was
Oh,
born. I wanted to,
understood.
and I also, when I was writing this thriller, I wanted it to be a good thriller, but I wanted to, have it go an extra step perhaps. And, in my book, there is, what I would call a more traditional ending. I mean, it's twisty, but it's a good twist and what someone might expect in a good thriller. But then I said, I want this to be different. I want it to go a little further. So then I added an epilogue, and that goes back to the major revelation and what my mother had said to me.
Understood. Got it. Well, I'm glad to know that, it all comes full circle then based on what we started with to that. So to anybody, may be interested in developing their own twists, drawing from experience is a way to start.
Basically, I had plotted the whole book, soup to nuts, before I started writing it. I mean, my process is really do the ideation, the plotting first, and write a pretty detailed outline about that. And so I need to know really not only what's going to happen in the ending, but what are the twists going to be along the way? Where am I going to plant my red herrings? All of that. And there's actually two kinds of writers. There's writers like me that plot things out ahead of time. And then there's writers that are called pantsers. And they literally write by the seat of their pants. They get on their PC and they start writing. They have no idea what's going to happen. And, somehow they get it done. And I applaud that. I mean, best-selling writers come from the two different ways of writing, plotting and pantsing. But I'm a plotter. And it's not like that my story is not going to change. It could. For example, one time I had written in this character that is supposed to be killed. And through the process of writing, I got to really know this character well. I really liked this character. And I just couldn't kill the character. So I had to change the plot. And then there was another time when, same thing, this person was supposed to be killed off. And I did follow my plot. The person was killed. But I was in such a depression for the longest period of time that my wife's like, what's wrong with you? Why are you so depressed? It's like, they're not real. Well, to the authors, they are real.
Yeah, definitely. And well, first off, to touch upon the plot that you were just talking about, whether to plot something out or not plot it out, have an outline or not. That's a big topic we always talk about here on the podcast. Everybody has their different opinion, I've come to learn. I'm like you, I plot out everything, because that's how I make sure that every detail is being covered. One pet peeve of mine is if I'm writing and, I wanted a character to have a certain quirk, for example, and I just forget that until halfway through or something like that. Then you're going back and forth and it's a whole mess. So I'm sure maybe you agree with that, right? It just helps you put you at ease,
It's a little more efficient, I think, to do it this way, but to each his own.
Yeah, exactly. And then drawing upon what you mentioned also about having just an emotional connection to your characters. Of course, we all feel that way too, but I guess it's just a sign of a good writer, you have to get fully immersed in your writing in order for your readers to do the same. So some really cool stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, perhaps we should go even farther back and talk about yourself, right? And your big marketing background, because I think that's really cool that you had a marketing job, which is really an amazing thing to have. But I guess my question then is, how did that role influence your writing? My first impression was, oh, marketing, you're sitting at a desk and maybe typing. But now I'm realizing it's actually a lot of creativity in both roles.
Yeah, you're right. There's definitely, creativity in marketing as well. And, I was a marketing consultant, and for, and working on big brands for many years. And we would have advertising agents come and present their advertising to us. And then we'd have to evaluate and say what we liked, what should be improved or not. And so what I learned from that is, first of all, of course, marketing 101, you need to fulfill the consumer's needs. You got to give the readers what they're looking for. But I also learned when you're creating, 30-second TV ads or 15-second TV ads, that every word counts in that. And even though my novel is 90,000 words, I still believe that every word counts and go back and make sure they do. So definitely marketing applies. And, I think that's a thing that a lot of authors, would-be authors, don't understand, is that how much marketing is a part of the job. So I'm a little lucky that I've got some in my background, but these days in the world of publishing, marketing, I say, is 50% of the job. For an author, 50% is writing, the other 50% is marketing. So you got to get out there and do podcasts. You got to get out there and get your book to bloggers, get reviews. You got to get out there and try and get stuff in newspapers. I had a local newspaper do a feature on me in my book a few weeks ago. You got to get on social media, of course. You just got to go. Even things like you go to book fairs, and if you have your book there, I've been to a number at bookstores or other places where I see the other authors and they're behind their table with their books there and they're kind of waiting for someone to come up to them. And I think because of my background, I'm up there out in front, grabbing them in, telling them about my book, and I've sold out every time I've been there. So authors got to realize that, you're not just an author. Marketing is a large part of it too.
Yeah, well, I'm loving that you said, a lot of your background came into play with this. I understand, both your parents were in the field and they probably taught you exactly what you need to do there. But you're absolutely right. When a book is on the shelves, it's not just like a child you sent away for college, right? You're still supporting that book and you have to check in on it and really amplify it as best you can, even years down the road. So what advice would you have for somebody who maybe just wasn't in the marketing field beforehand? How would you suggest that they try to do the same for their book?
Well, step one is really build your contacts on social media. Get on friends on Facebook and on Instagram. Start building that now. And to the degree you can start collecting emails too, so you eventually could do some direct marketing, that would be great too. But, you got to push yourself. You got to, and try and do a lot of these things, because the more you do them, the better you'll get at it. So, and there's courses you can take. And even beyond marketing, I would say to authors that, there is a craft to writing, and you should try and learn and practice that craft. For example, I took a couple of video seminars from Lee Child of the Jack Reacher books, and Harlan Coben, another great thriller writer. And I think it was BBC Maestro that had the courses, and they were good. It was interesting that they often contradicted each other, but it's good to learn certain things and take what works for you. And then there's things like, for a thriller writer, I'm going to Thriller Fest in New York City. It's an annual convention for thriller writers, and they have, as part of it, all sorts of sessions on different elements of writing that you could learn. And then you socialize and meet other authors, both best-selling authors as well as people who haven't been published yet. And what I found is that the publishing community, the author community, is so nice. They're just so helpful. Doesn't matter if you've never published or you're a bestseller. They're all the same, all trying to be helpful. In fact, if anyone has any questions for me at any point, I'm happy to answer them. But, as a writer, do that. Go into these even local things. I'm living in Sarasota, Florida now, and there's Florida Writers Association. They do the same thing. They have meetings where you can they teach you, you hone your craft, you meet other writers. So it's good to do that. Join writers group, just do that. So, you have a task of both learning the marketing, but you have the task of a lifetime task of continuing to learn writing.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And once again, we're drawing it back to having that community, which is, amazing to have, right? You always need somebody by your back to help you through that. And I really do appreciate those tips. And to everybody listening today, make that your homework, right? Try to implement a few of those right after this podcast when you're own writing. So, switching back to the book itself now, I looked it through a bit. And, I noticed the opening scene just really intense, right? It draws readers right into the action. I guess I'm curious to know, was this always part of your vision, or did it evolve during the writing process, sort of an attempt to draw readers in more? What would you say?
I guess a little bit of both. I mean, for me, my style is one where, in order to propel the action forward and keep things moving, I write in short chapters because I
Mm.
think the readers, feel like the book's moving along and they're making progress. And I write, and I try and end each chapter with a hook. And that hook could be physical, it could be emotional, could be psychological. And then I like to start the next chapter with an intriguing first line so that the reader wants to continue reading it. And I also like to have a couple little subplots going, so they might vary chapter to chapter. First chapter will have one story going, and the next chapter will have a different subplot, and then you'll get back to the original in the third chapter, that kind of thing. Because I think that makes it interesting as well. You don't want to resolve the cliffhanger ending too quickly. And I guess the other thing that helps move the stories along is I write from different points of view. So usually the point of view I'm writing from is the character that it's what's happening to that character now, or it's what's the most emotional thing going on. It's to that character. So I get different perspectives. So you get the perspectives of the bad guys and the good guys. So I think all of that is what keeps the pace going.
Awesome. I love that. You really do need to make sure you have that quick pace in a book, especially a thriller book, but any book too, really, be it nonfiction or whatever, because you said it yourself. Those shorter chapters, those brief statements is what makes readers think that things are moving along. We have short attention spans, right? I'm sure you could agree with that, Michael. So, you need to make sure you're catering to that in your readers. You want to keep them engaged.
And there's so much we're competing with TV, video games, online sites. I mean, there's so much that, someone else can go to for their entertainment needs. So that's why I think we got to really keep the stories moving.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, speaking of that competitive edge, I understand you worked with a traditional publisher for this book. So I'm wondering if you don't mind sharing a little bit about that process. Here at Authors on Mission, we're a little bit of a mix of both. So I'm interested to know your side of things and how was the process for you?
Well, it's an interesting process, and you have to be really resilient and believe in yourself and be tough.
Mm.
Because the hardest thing, I think, is actually getting a literary agent first to take you on. And that's going to take tons of query letters. And I think that, the process of getting a literary agent to take you on is probably harder than getting published once an agent has taken you on. But it's not easy to get published either, of course. I mean, I remember back in the days in the firm I work with, one of the authors was Robert Ludlum, who you may know from the Born Identity movies with Matt Damon. His agent sent out his first novel to 13 different publishers, and all 13 rejected it. Finally, the 14th took it on, and it became a bestseller, as did all of his other novels after that. So hang in there, be resilient, don't get discouraged, and something good will happen.
Amazing. I thank you for that, because I'm sure you got just a lot of, critique and feedback in the beginning, but I guess what you mean by that is you need to keep editing and just, keep a positive, head in your shoulders. I'm sure maybe your background also helped you with that too, knowing that your parents have been through the same. Would you say you went to them as well for like support during this process, especially the editing part?
Well, they're no longer with us, though I'm
Oh.
sure they are in some ways. But my mother was an editor at New York City publishing houses back in the day, and of course, the publishing firm that I liked most that she worked with once also published Archie comics. So, getting a free supply as a kid every week of Archie comics was definitely a highlight. But I do distinctly, remember her sitting on her bed, cross-legged on a weekend, manuscript pages strewn about her, red pen in hand, and writing comments all throughout the manuscripts. So I guess that prepared me for when I would get my editorial feedback. I was talking to another author, Sarah Penner, whose first novel was a best-selling book, a great book, and The Lost Apothecary. And she said that she went through this whole process, very tough, finally got a publisher, and the publisher offered her and her agent a lot of money for that book. And she was so happy, thrilled, of course. And then she got her editorial feedback, and she said she spent a week crying because they wanted so many changes. She said, why did they buy this book if they wanted me to change so much? But, at least with the experience with my mother, well, the feedback I got, it wasn't in a red pen, but those comments in the margin of the Word document were just as, what should I say, instructive. But at least I was prepared.
Hey, I love it. I love it. I really appreciate you sharing that with us. And again, I know, how hard it might be to speak of your parents and all that, but they really were a guiding light, which is why I brought that up. So, it's always, yeah. That being said, I mean, we touched upon, your experiences, perspectives on the book. I guess I'm curious to know, I mean, what else might be on the horizon now? You have this book out, is there more to come, perhaps?
Well, yes, and I am writing. I have done the plotting and most of the research and started a little bit of the writing of my second book. Now it's certainly in the same genre. It's another thriller. And because, it's like branding where publishers want you to be known for a certain thing. It also does have the same two main characters, the two detectives from the first one, because publishers seem to like series two, because if you get enough people to like the first one, then they'd like to revisit the characters again. And certainly it's the same writing style. And, I'm actually very lucky because today I saw on the bestseller list, the number one person on the list was J.D. Barker with his new novel. And J.D. Barker did read What Goes Around, my novel, and said about it, Wendroff expertly weaves a narrative that begs just one more page. So I was happy for JD and happy for me, and that's how I want to write. That's how I'm writing my second novel, where the readers will beg for one more page.
Hey, I love that. And you know what I'm noticing too is a huge thing that, goes into your book too is all these amazing reviews and feedback that you've gotten too, right? I mean, J.D. Barker, amazing. Congratulations on his behalf for the bestseller. But, it's really cool to know that you have that feedback on your book and attached to it too. I'm wondering, for anybody listening today, how can they go about getting, people to write feedback for them too? Did it also have to do with your connections, like the interviews earlier, or what was that like? What was that process like?
I tell you, it's really a hard thing to do. And for me, what it really went back to was meeting these authors at these conventions and just going up, and it could be intimidating, but just going up and introducing yourselves and starting to talk. And, I got J.D. Barker that way at Thriller Fest. Lisa Black, another best-selling author, gave me a great review, and I met her at the Florida Writers Convention. So, just, take a shot at meeting them, and then, you start to form a little connection, and you keep in touch on social media, and you could get lucky. I think I just got very lucky.
Good. Yeah, I guess there's an element of luck in that too. It's about the connections, it's about the luck. But no, I thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. It's good to know that no matter where you are, even if you don't have those connections to start, maybe that you just need a little bit of luck or reaching out or forming those bonds. So I appreciate that. Let's see. I'm wondering now also if there's any other pieces of advice you might want to offer our listeners today regarding the writing process or the editing process, publishing.
Well, I guess a couple things. One is relative to writing itself. I recommend you write every day. Maybe you could take off New Year's or Christmas or something like that.
Oh, we get holidays off. Okay.
But for me, I mean, my process is really get up in the morning, start writing, and just get the words out. Don't worry. Certainly not about spelling or grammar, but even about, how well your writing is. Just move the story along. And then the next day I will go back and I will review what I wrote the day before. And that's when I try and make it into real writing. And I'll look at every word to make sure it goes with the other words in the sentence, and every sentence to make sure it goes with the other words in the other sentences. And then, I'll go back and try and add analogies or metaphors or whatever, that sentence or paragraph needs. And then after I'm done with that, then I'll start writing and get the story out. And that'll be my process day after day. So scribble the story out, don't worry that much about it, and then go back, rewrite it, and do that every day. And if I take a couple of weeks off, I think that's terrible. I need the flow, in the flow of it, and until finally you can write my two favorite words, which are the end. So write every day, and then also the other, I guess, major piece of advice would be make sure you edit, because when I finally wrote the end, I learned that that was not the end of writing, of editing. First there's like the normal stuff that people do, show it to their family and friends, perhaps, to get feedback, which is good. Some people have writing groups they'll show it to, or pieces of it too, which is good. But I also use what's known as beta readers, and those are people that read in your category. They could be friends. And I gave that to a few people, and I got really good insights. I did change one thing around, one major point around based on that. So that was helpful. But again, then when my book was sold, I learned even more that it wasn't the end. Because there are in traditional publishing, there's lots of different kinds of editors. I mean, the first one is the editor that acquires your book. And that editor, I would say, is more like strategic or conceptual. It could be you need a prologue, or you need to bring this character in earlier or later, kind of big picture stuff. And then there's a line editor, which is what it sounds, looks at every line in your book and makes sure it's as good as it can be. And there's a copy editor whose job is to make sure you didn't say she has blue eyes in chapter 2 and green eyes in chapter 8, or if you have facts, dates, or things about, guns or something, they'll check the facts. And then there's the proofer who's checking everything. And each time, every single one of those stages, I have to go back and read my book. And I thought I was done. And then my publisher comes back and says, okay, we just set the typeface on your hardcover edition. You need to read it again to make sure that nothing fell out during the typeface process. I can't tell you how many times I read my book. It's a good thing I like it.
Hey, it's all worth it though, right? No matter how many processes and
always better.
Yeah. So I appreciate that. And thanks for, kind of laying out the scope of everything, especially the different types of editing. As an editor myself, I know what it's like to have clients come to me and, they don't even know the type of editing they're looking for. So there's a lot of explanation in that. So it's good to know that, now our listeners today can kind of differentiate between all of them. Yeah, I like that last line too. Then it's good that I like my book. I guess that's another tip for our listeners today too, is that, you have to actually like what you're writing about to get through it.
And the funny thing is, the twists still surprise me.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you're getting yourself immersed in the story, same with watching a movie or something, but even if you've done it 1,000 times, you still love your favorite parts. So yeah, well, I'm wondering now, if anybody today wants to get in touch with you, maybe learn a little bit more from you, or of course, pick up a copy of the book also, where can they find you? What can they reach out?
So you can reach me on michaelwendroff.com. You can send me an email from there, and I will definitely answer you. And you could get my books at a lot of different places, including Amazon. And on Amazon, it's available in hardcover. It's entered its third printing already, which is great. Or you can get the audiobook, for those of you who I know like audio. And you can also get the ebook. And next year, you can get it in a bunch of different foreign languages.
Awesome. Well, there we go. And we're going to put links to all that in the description of this podcast today. So be sure to check those out, click those buttons. And other than that, I mean, Michael, do you have any last bits of advice for our listeners today?
Never give up. Keep at it. Keep at it. Write every day. Edit. And you'll get there.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And thank you for all the insights for today's podcast as well. And to everybody listening, again, check out the book. It's a very, page turning, full of twists thriller that, I think anybody would enjoy reading, whatever walk of life you might be in. I think it's something we should all be looking at. So check out the links again. And this brings us to the end of today's episode with Michael Wendroff. It was a really illuminating conversation about the journey from aspiring to published author. So, Michael, thank you for sharing your unique perspective. I really appreciate that.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, your background in publishing and marketing obviously had a huge role to play, but your story also just serves as an inspiration for our listeners who may be harboring their own writing dreams, and just know it's never too late to pursue your passion, even if it takes decades and a global pandemic to make it happen. And to our audience, remember that Authors on Mission is committed to empowering you with knowledge and confidence to become experts in your own fields. We don't just talk about successful authors and entrepreneurs, we learn directly from their experiences to help you craft your own path to success. So Michael's thriller, What Goes Around, is available now, as we mentioned. You can follow him on his sites and check out his links that we'll have in the description as well. And until next time, keep writing, keep learning, and stay on your mission. Have a great day, everybody. And Michael, thanks again.
Bye-bye.
This is Danielle Hutchinson reminding you that somewhere, someone needs the book that only you can write. Visit authorsonmission.com to start your legacy. Until next time, keep leading, keep inspiring, and keep thinking in chapters. Have a great day.